Hello, you delightful individuals, and welcome on into Thirst and Vanity. And now this is the second time in a row that I've done this. Hold on a second. Hey, that's me, Beetlejuice, having a good time, having a wonderful scenario. Sat here in my little three-piece suit. Look, hey, three-piece, calm yourself. That's made have a good time and what have you. But here I am, gonna go and see Beetlejuice this evening. I thought I'd dress up to impress the occasion. It's all right, it's okay. It's just one of those tricky little scenarios that I thought I'd do. What have you. In a little while, I'll be heading out to go see myself in the theaters and the cinemas. And I always knew I was going to be a movie star. and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to review it. So that's enough of that. Yeah, so this is me, dressed as Beetlejuice, preparing myself to go and see the Beetlejuice movie. Obviously, I was going to dress to impress because I'm quite excited about this movie. I was excited and also naturally had the outfit because I've done Beetlejuice before and what have you. This was literally made with a three-piece suit and a can of spray paint and a whole load of tape, but yeah, it's got that raggedy vibes that I'm a big fan of. So I'm gonna go see the movie and I will come back and let you all know how the movie is. We'll do what we usually do. We'll have a spoiler-free section and then a spoiler section, and then we'll round it all up and give you my final thoughts and stuff, okay? So I'll see you in a couple of hours when I get back to do the review and what have you. And yes, I am going dressed like this, because why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? Me, here, the cinema, good lord. Cameras, that's right. It's showtime. It says a lot about a movie when it's like a week and a half later, in fact, nearly 2 weeks later, and the cinema is still full. Like, we sat right down at the front, in the middle of the front row, because there was no other seats available for us to sit, me and my friends to sit together. And that says a lot about a movie like this. I expected it to be a pretty empty theater. It's a Tuesday night, just nice and easy, just going down and see what's what. But no, the place was full, and it says a lot about a movie when like you're a couple of weeks in this day and age where movies are very much on demand and very quickly come out to streaming services and stuff like that. For a movie to be that popular that far into its title, and maybe I was just lulled into a false sense of security with like The Crow and going there a couple of weeks later and it being an empty theater. Maybe I don't fully understand. I'm not a cinephile, as it were, but yeah, I was surprised to find that the only seats that were available were right on the front row, very much reclining, trying to see what it is. And the front row is an awful place to see. However, I had a great time. I had a really good time. I really enjoyed myself, very much enjoyed the movie. And yeah, let's get into it, shall we? Before we go any further, as previously stated, I'm going to do a spoiler-free section and then a spoiler section. There is a lot to talk about. I have got a whole load of stuff to talk about. So first of all, spoiler-free. This is for anybody that hasn't seen the movie and doesn't want to know anything about the movie, all right? Here is your spoiler-free section. The movie is very enjoyable. If you like the original movie, this movie is a very good follow-on from that movie. There were a lot of harkbacks to the original movie that didn't feel like they were forced. They didn't feel like it was just there for fan service. It felt very natural. It felt very much like it was a nostalgic reminisce of the original movie, rather than, hey, look, we're featuring the original movie stuff. Hey, unlike certain other movies that I have recently reviewed. So massive tick box for that. Big tick box for that. It was great. Genuinely really enjoyed that element of it. It very much captures a lot of the essence of the original movie itself. Like, there's a lot of feeling, a lot of, obviously, the aesthetic choices, the music choices as well, and of course having the features of the original cast. Fantastic. Brilliant. But it grows on that as well. There's a lot of growth. It felt like you had taken the original plant, the seedling of the original movie, and just watched it bloom The atmosphere was on point, which is actually a sign of a fantastic sequel, in my personal opinion, when you take the original source material and you allow it to grow. Part of that was the cast, having so many members of the original cast come and play their characters in this movie, and then having other stars on top of that, we'll talk about that in a moment, being there to grow from that. Part of it was the music, having the original music there, and then having Danny Elfman, who was the composer for the original one, if I remember correctly, and was the composer for the score of Beetlejuice. So having that original theme tune, original composer, and having them grow from the original source material out was fantastic. The aesthetics, very much the same, taking the original source material, a lot of the original aesthetic choices, set design, character design, costume design, and what have you, and then expanding from that to make it bigger and more interesting. And then, of course, like the storylines, but we'll get onto the storylines in a minute. But the whole thing felt like they'd taken the original source material and grown from that. It wasn't like a separate story that was like a follow-on from, like a lot of sequels are. You've got like the original and then like the next bit of the chapter. This felt like they'd taken the original and let it bloom, which was genuinely enjoyable. As somebody who's quite nostalgic for the original movie, it's genuinely enjoyable to see that occurring, like in a movie, you know? You could see that there was no love that was lost from the original movie. The people who were involved, the director, obviously, Tim Burton himself, the creator, the composer, all of the set design, everyone felt like they had a genuine love for the source material, and they allowed that to be extended to be a bigger, more budgeted show, you know? Let's talk about the dad, shall we? Many of you may or may not be aware that the father in the original movie, Mr. Dietz, Lydia's father, was played by Jeffrey Jones. And Jeffrey Jones was arrested many years ago for some very bad things. I don't really want to get too much into his story, but he was arrested and put on, he wasn't sent to prison, but he was put on a community order for indecent images of an underage individual. If you want to look into that, you can do, but needless to say, it was one of those things that when I found out about this, I was like, how the hell are they going to do the story with so many of the original cast without including the dad? And I thought they were just going to palm it off with being like, hey, the dad's no longer in the picture. But the way that they did it was actually really good. I was worried. I was really worried about how they were going to do it, but now having seen it, I thought the way that they executed it was fantastic. I thought it was a really clever way of dealing with a character that was so present in the original movie that you couldn't have in this movie, and the way they dealt with it was fantastic. It was very good. It was very well executed, where the dad could still be present, but not having that actor as part of it. And I won't spoil it for you. Obviously, this is the spoiler-free section, but trust me when I say I was surprised at the way they did it and loved the way they did it. It was very well done. Now, I will say that there were bits of the entire thing, the entire movie, that initially felt like odd choices to me. As I was sat there watching it, I was like, oh, this is an odd choice. But as the movie went on and as the scenes went on, they didn't feel too unnatural. They felt like they quickly slotted into place. Those bits where I was like, oh, this isn't something that I immediately expected. And then it very quickly slotted into place. And I was like, oh, no, actually, it does fit. That being said, I do feel that the movie was too busy. There was too much going on in the overall movie. There was so many different things happening, so many different... How do I say this without spoilers? You know, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that there was a lot of storylines, a lot of different storylines happening at the same time. And I personally felt that that made the entire movie a bit too busy. But the movie itself was still very much enjoyable. If you're interested in me exploring that a little bit later, I will be doing it in the spoiler section so that people can understand that a little bit better. But I can't do that without spoilers, you know? And also, the other thing that I can say that was absolutely fantastic about it was the all-star cast. Like, they literally took the original cast and, like I said, grew on it. The original cast, who were all very talented actors and performers in and of themselves. And when I say an all-star cast, I don't just mean big names. I mean that the talent was fantastic. Was absolutely fantastic. Obviously, Monica Bellucci, Willem Dafoe, just beautiful. Fantastic actors, fantastic performers, and they did their job very, very well. In and of themselves, in their own little things that they were a part of, they were great. They were really good. I really enjoyed it, and there was an awful lot of like cameos in there as well. Lots of like little things. Oh my god, I know that actor. Insert name here, and they didn't. Even if they didn't stick around for long, they were just like, oh god, I know them. Oh god, that's amazing. They had a cameo in this. It very much felt like a movie that was well loved by so many people within Hollywood itself, that so many actors wanted to be involved in some way, shape, or form. They wanted to be involved, and therefore they had the cameos there for them, and it worked. It worked really, really well in the vast majority of cases, you know? So that is all I can really say in the spoiler-free section. I'm now going to go into spoilers. So I'm now going to talk about the movie. If you don't want to talk about the movie, if you don't want me to like spoil anything and what have you, you can skip ahead to this point here where I will do my little summary that won't have any spoilers in it. But now we're going to talk about stuff in the movie that has spoilers, and there is a lot to talk about. So let's get into it. Let's talk about this stuff, you know? All right, let's talk about spoilers, shall we? Where to begin? Let's begin with the father. Let's begin with Dad. Mr. Dietz, as he were. Obviously, Jeffrey Jones is a bad person, and understandably, they wouldn't want him as part of this movie, or should I say any movie. However, having the dad's death, oh yeah, by the way, the dad dies, having the dad's death as a way to bring the family together is a great starting point, a great way to have a reason for him not to be in the movie, and for everybody in their grown-up stages to have a reason to come from their various locations together as one family, you know? Also, the manner in which Mr. Dietz dies, the manner in which he actually becomes deceased, is so well done because it means that you never actually have to see the actor himself. It's like a great workaround, like a fun workaround as well. It's not like, oh, he just got caught in a fire or what have you. It's a really intriguing and peculiar story that creates a way for him not to be seen, yet still be quite present, or the character is still present in the movie, despite not being played by this individual, by Jeffrey Jones, you know? Which then leads me on to the cast themselves. The cast was sensational. The cast were absolutely fantastic. Very well chosen. I know that obviously a lot of them were there from the original movie, and then of course they got a lot of stars going on there. We of course had Wednesday star Jenna Ortega, Monica Bellucci, and Willem Dafoe, whose entire character was everything. Willem Dafoe I love as an actor anyway. I think he's an unbelievably talented individual, but to see him play this character and the way that he played it was just, it was art. In and of itself, it was art, yet didn't overshadow all of the other stuff that was going on. But I'll get on to all of that in a minute. But generally speaking, the cast themselves were sensational. And for having so many big names, and as I mentioned before, not just big names, but big talents there, you could tell that the original movie was very well loved, and a lot of these people wanted to be involved in it. That being said, there was almost too much talent. There was almost too much talent in the regards that some of it felt like they were putting characters into the movie for the sake of putting characters into the movie. I'll talk in a minute about, as I mentioned, I felt it was very, very busy, but I'll talk about that in a second. For example, Monica Bellucci. Monica Bellucci, I love as an actor. An extremely talented, attractive, elegant, beautiful woman who is sensational as a performer. Love everything that she does. However, when I look back on the movie, when I think back about like literally the past 2-3 hours of my life, I didn't see a point in her character. Like, I understood the reason why she was there. I understood the storyline. But when I actually compare her character's presence in the movie to the entire movie, it didn't need to be there. It didn't need to be there. It didn't bring anything major to the story that would have enriched the story any more or any less for her not being there. And there was a couple of points in the movie where I felt this, where it was just like, okay, why? In fact, you know what? Let's talk about that now. As I said before, it was too busy. It was too busy. There was too much going on. There were so many twisting and turning and convoluted storylines that all wrapped up super quickly or ended in a way that made me wonder what the point was. Like, if I just talk about the different storylines that I can think of off the top of my head, all right, the ones that made sense, that all fit together in a really nice way with a bow on top. I've got a list here, so let's go through them. The death of the father, the mother's art project around her grief, Lydia being a spirit medium and her relationship with her partner. And I will say that her partner in the movie is very much the Otho character. If you remember Otho from the original movie, Lydia's partner was very much the token Otho character and worked really well. It was very well executed, I have to say, okay? Then there was Astrid's relationship with her mother. So Astrid is Lydia's daughter and Astrid's love interest. And then, of course, the return of Beetlejuice. They all worked really, really nicely and fit all together in a nice little bow. And then on top of those storylines that were going on, there were these storylines. And I'm not saying that these storylines didn't fit, but I am saying they were extras that added a lot of convoluted confusion to it. Not even confusion, just it added so much more that ended up making it feel too busy. So on top of all of those ones that we just talked about, there was also Beetlejuice's backstory, Beetlejuice's ex-wife, Astrid's love interest's story, the priest, and for those of you who have seen it, the priest didn't have a story, but they were basically a background character, but there was enough going on with the priest that hinted that there was a story there that wasn't fully told. So there was no direct story, but there was enough going on where you were like, hold on a second, what's this all about? Then there was the afterlife cops, Lydia's marriage, Astrid's father, and Beetlejuice's call center and their employees. If you watch the movie, you'll understand what I mean by that. But that's another 8? So there's 5 storylines that all fit together in a nice little bow, and then 8 additional storylines on top of those that fit around the main. It's like there is a plait of storylines in the middle, and then all of the others that are plaited around it. You know, it's a very convoluted scenario, and it ended up making the whole thing feel very, very busy. A lot going on, a lot to keep track of, a lot of things that were tied and woven in and out each other like a bowl of spaghetti, you know? It very much felt like there was a lot of different writers that were all writing short stories about Beetlejuice, and then they needed to fit those short stories into an overarching story that was the movie. And to be honest with you, every single one of them worked. Like, they did work in relation to the core storyline. I don't, to be honest with you, I can't even say there was a core storyline. There was loads of little storylines that made the core storyline. Back to my plot idea concept, you know? And like I said, every single one of them worked until it didn't. And what I mean by that is that each of the storylines in and of themselves left me feeling underwhelmed, or left me feeling thinking, what was the point of that? Or what even happened to this storyline? What actually occurred with the end of this storyline? Was there an end to this storyline? It honestly felt like the writers ran out of time to tell the story properly. So when it came to the designated time to end that story, they just wrapped it up as quickly as possible. And that left me feeling quite underwhelmed. The example I gave you just there, the Monica Bellucci one, that storyline, I was just like, oh, that's the end of that then. Fair enough, I suppose. Which was bizarre because it shouldn't have felt like that. It like each of the storylines worked so well in with all of the other storylines until the end, until like the final bit of that story. It's really hard to explain, but effectively, yeah, like the storyline worked. You had the main storylines that all wove in and out of each other. Then you had the surrounding storylines, and everything worked really, really well together until each one had to come to an end. And when it came to an end, it was very quickly ended, and it was like, oh, that's the end of that then. Right, okay, on to the next thing, I suppose. That being said, there were several scenes, including musical numbers, where they started and I was like, okay, what's going on here? What is this all about? And then for some reason fit. Like, I started by thinking, what is this? And then it just fit into place. And I found myself smiling and enjoying it. And like, it felt peculiar, and yet it somehow worked. There was a couple of little scenes in the movie that when they first started, I was like, this doesn't work. And yet very quickly I went, actually, no, it does. It does work. That works so well. And yet it shouldn't work. It shouldn't work. And I'm confused as to why it does. And of course, in amongst all of that, there were some like super cringeworthy moments. But much like the original movie, they worked as well. None of them made me roll my eyes in despair, which, as somebody who hates to cringe, there's an awful lot of times I'm like, oh, for God's sake. And there wasn't a single moment of that. There was points where I was like, oh, this is cringeworthy. This makes me feel uncomfortable in that weird way. But it worked. It didn't detract from the story. If anything, it added to the story, as it should have done. I feel like they were executed really, really well, and each one fit really nicely into whichever story arc that they were following, which for someone who hates to cringe, that says a lot. That says an awful lot, all right? Now, there were also some really serious topics in this, and it's a really interesting thing to think about, because obviously the original movie talked about death and people's relationship to death and people's like interaction with the whole concept of death and moving on and progressing forward, etc., including grief and a person's own grief having died and been in a situation they weren't expecting, etc. But this one tackled a couple of other serious subjects, and I felt like it did it in a very delicate way. For starters, PTSD. Lydia's character had PTSD from the whole ordeal with the first movie. I will say that I don't have PTSD, and I'm very lucky in the regards that I don't have PTSD, so I don't know whether it was an accurate representation of what PTSD is like by any stretch of the imagination, but it didn't feel like they were taking the piss with it. It didn't feel like they were putting it in there for the sake of putting it in there. It felt like a very real part of Lydia's character, and after what happened in the first movie, it makes sense that she would have PTSD. They also very delicately tackled the idea of fame. And not only fame, but like the toxicity and the pressure of social media. And in amongst that, they also included dynamics of exploitation within social media and within the show business industry. Lydia runs a ghost show. And I have to say, as somebody who loves ghost shows, as somebody who very much enjoys watching ghost hunters and ghost adventures and stuff like that, I don't believe in any of it personally, but I enjoy watching them, all right? There's no guilt in this pleasure. It is not a guilty pleasure. I very much enjoy watching them explore the realms of the paranormal, despite the fact that I don't believe in any of it. There is something joyous in that for me. And the way that they portrayed, like, Lydia's ghost show really harked back to the way that some of these people do their shows, and it's so beautifully executed. It's so well done, so you can immediately see where the fame comes from, and then with that rooted in Lydia's storyline, you get to see the effects of that, the effects that it has on those closest to her, the effects that it has on people around her, the effects of social media and social media influencers doing what they can to get the next big thing and be the next big person and be in the right place at the right time, and the toxicity and exploitation around that. And it's a really, really delicate subject. Like, there were elements of it that were quite tongue-in-cheek, like over the top for sure, but I feel like it did portray it in a really interesting way. Hard to explain without having seen it, but yeah, it was very interesting the way that they went about it and the toxicity within all of that. And given the fact that the vast majority of these people, in fact, the entire cast, were all very, very famous individuals and famous producers and famous composers and famous directors, etc., I'm sure they have all had experience of that. So I'm sure that was a point that was quite close to their personal experiences as well. I mentioned before about the fact there were a lot of callbacks to the original movie, and none of them felt forced. Like, every single one of them felt beautifully nostalgic, and there wasn't a single point that I felt like, okay, they're money grabbing, they're trying to hook people in or clickbait people or what have you. Every one of them felt natural and like immersed in the stories that were going on in this movie. You could tell that the feeling of the original movie was very much present throughout the entire thing. It was the backbone of everything that went on in this movie itself. Hello, you delightful individuals. ValenVain from editing here. I just wanted to pop in and say that even though it didn't feel like they were money grabbing, there was an element of the movie that felt like they had too much budget. Now that I've had the time to sit and think about the whole movie and what was going on and what have you, it did feel like they had too much money and they didn't know what to do about it. I know that they did loads and loads of like marketing campaigns, and there was loads of like commercial partnerships and stuff, kind of like the Barbie movie and stuff like that. But it genuinely felt like there was too much money, and they were just like, right, okay, we've got all this money, put in some extra stuff, put in these things. Okay, we'll hire all these people, we'll do all this stuff. And that was great, but it kind of felt like they didn't need to spend all of the money. So they made the original movie, the first Beetlejuice movie, on $15 million. And the second Beetlejuice movie had a production cost of over $100 million. So it was over 6 times the amount that they had for the first movie. And honestly, in hindsight, that really shows. It genuinely feels like they had so much money that they didn't know what to do with, so they just kept finding ways to spend it, which I understand why they have been given a massive budget, because of course there's a lot of love for the original material and there's a lot of hype around that cult classic and the audience that grew up with that cult classic. But now that I've had the time to sit and think about it, it did feel like they were spending money because they had it, as opposed to really pushing for a very specific idea regardless of how much money they were given. Anyway, back to BETELGEUSE. And as I mentioned before, felt like they took that and then grew upon it, made it bigger, where it let it grow in the sunshine, you know? And I think one of the biggest features of that, as well as like the aesthetics and stuff like that, was actually the special effects. There was very little like new age CGI that was used. A lot of the old effects were used, a lot of the old puppetry and scenery and special effects were used to really give it that feeling that it was a direct continuation from the old movie. And I think that really played in its favor. And then, of course, having all the original cast there and growing from that to have other big names and big talents around like the core group, it was beautifully done. It was really, really well done. And I absolutely loved so many of those characters, including new characters. They worked so very well together. And you could really see that there was genuine chemistry between the characters in their various different storylines, you know? And then there was the ending. The ending was odd. It was foreboding. Like, it was setting up for a third movie, but at the same time wasn't. It was very convoluted and very unsettling. In fact, there was quite a few parts in this movie that were quite unsettling, but great at the same time. But the end, the finale of it was very weird. Foreboding is probably the best word I can use for that. It felt like it was a vision of what was to come, and yet could very comfortably sit where it is without having any sequel to it. I have no idea if they're planning to make it a trilogy or if that is that and that's it done. But it felt very odd. Like, there was a really beautiful meaning behind it, and I understand why they did it that way, but it just felt very peculiar. Yeah, it just felt like an odd one. It felt like an odd one, to say the least. All in all, I felt like it was a really good movie. I really enjoyed watching it. I really enjoyed the nostalgia. I really enjoyed the odd scene placements that shouldn't have worked, but for some reason did work. And I enjoyed each storyline in and of itself, but when they were put together, it felt like they were too busy. Like, each one made sense, but when they were all put together, it felt like they were too busy. It felt like they wrote a script for an entire TV series and then realized they needed to fit it into a movie, which is a shame, because I think it would have made a very good TV series if they'd have been able to expand on all the different elements in and of itself. But regardless of that, it was a good movie. I did enjoy it, and I would watch it again. So yeah, that was my review of Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice.
You know, having a good time, putting myself on the big screen, just, you know, having a real good time. You should go see it too. Oh yeah, if I do say so myself. If you enjoyed the original movie and you enjoy all kinds of things convoluted and peculiar and dark and mysterious and yet at the same time kind of entertaining, well, you should go check out Beetlejuice. And I do genuinely believe that. I do genuinely believe that. I did genuinely enjoy it. It did bring a lot of nostalgia, and yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Thank you very much for watching, friends. I very, very much appreciate you sticking around and watching my delightful, bedraggled and Beetlejuicean face. Don't forget, you can check me out on twitch.tv/ValenVain, where I talk about all kinds of stuff, and you're more than welcome to come in and talk to me about this movie if you would like, or other movies and bits and pieces. We talk about all kinds of peculiar and interesting things over there. You can check me out on TikTok. I'm posting on TikTok far more regular these days, so I'm pretty much posting every day if I can manage it. Where we find out about whimsical facts about schmecks and other peculiar thoughts of whimsy that pop into my brain, you know. And of course, you can check me out on Instagram, which usually has a bit more behind the scenes stuff. I've got a whole load of shows coming up between now and the end of the year, so you'll probably find a lot more behind the scenes stuff going on Instagram and what have you, you know. These are the social medias that most people find me on, so I encourage you to do the same, you beautiful individuals, okay? If you have enjoyed my little review, then please think about clicking that cheeky little thumbs up. If you have any thoughts, then put them down in the comments about movies you would like me to review, thoughts on the original movie, what you thought of Beetlejuice itself, or what you thought of the new movie. I'd very much appreciate hearing your thoughts, because I do read all the comments and see what's going on there, you know. And of course, if you haven't done it already, then consider pressing the subscribe button. I'll never tell you to do it, because I'm not that kind of person, but I will ask you to consider it. If this is the kind of entertainment you like and you enjoy my delightful visage, then, you know, click that cheeky little subscribe button and we'll have a good time, you know? It is now ridiculously late, and I've got a whole load of editing to do, and I want to watch another movie this evening, because I got more movie content coming your way. Of course I do. I realize that there has been an awful lot of movie stuff that we've been talking about recently with The Crow and Beetlejuice and Alien Romulus and all kinds of bits and pieces. This isn't the only type of content that I do. I do a whole load of hedonistic glory, talk about sex education, talk about all kinds of different bits and pieces, because I like to keep things nice and varied. There will be some more talks about movies and bits and pieces. I'm going to be doing some like reviews of other movies and like groups of movies and stuff like that, which I feel like might be quite interesting in the near future, but you will have to stay tuned if you want to check that out. In the meantime, friends, don't do anything I wouldn't do, because if I wouldn't do it, it'll fucking kill you.